Kansas State continues to cook in the portal.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rau, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, we got a lot of things to talk about. Some Wildcats are moving, going in different directions. The NFL draft, the Senior Bowl, some interesting prospect bowls. We're going to talk about that on this show. We got some visits coming up in Manhattan. But first, we got to get to the biggest name of the day when it comes to Kansas State. We have a brand new commit, and that is Jayshawn Ross, formerly of Alabama, the edge rusher, commits to Kansas State. And this is a big announcement, and you might have heard his name before because he was recruited by Kansas State coming out of high school, and we get him, finally land him, and it doesn't seem like edge was going to be a priority for Kansas State on the docket for Chris Kleiman and the rest of his staff, but they're filling the holes as needed. They are bringing in a plenty amount of roster names to battle for those 105. And I think we're starting to get an idea here that now that this transfer class is getting bigger, we're now at 10. We're up to 10 players in the transfer portal. And I think that's the highest that I expected. And I don't think we're done. We're going to talk about that as we're still picking up visits and still continuing. It could be up to 12, 13, maybe even 14 when it's all said and done heading into spring ball. But I think what we're getting at here is that Chris Kleiman and the rest of the coaching staff is going to make sure that when the season comes, when week 0 is here against Iowa State in Dublin, that they have the best 105 they can possibly bring for the Wildcats, for that roster. I truly feel that. And although there's going to be some sad goodbyes and probably some fan favorites, some names that we've already heard and watched play over the years, because right now we're sitting at about 124 players on the roster. They're going to have to say goodbye to 20 of them right now. I think that when it's all said and done, we're going to have a much better feeling about this roster. If you have any worries at all, I think a lot of things have changed with this Kansas State roster, with the new recruiting class coming in, the huge class they signed on National Signing Day. And then now 10 transfer portal hits already. And they're not done. But Jayshawn Ross commits to Kansas State and a big hit. I think he's a Kansas City native. He returns to the Midwest. And according to On3 and 24/7, three-star recruit heading out of Kansas State, he was ranked inside the top 175 as a prep prospect. Excuse me, I can't even talk today. But I do think that he's going to be a really fun piece and an edge. And it's not one that they truly need, but I think can be a big impact for this defense. Heading out into college, out of high school, he was a guy that Saban really wanted. And if it wasn't for Nick Saban retiring, he might have never entered the transfer portal. And that's something to keep in mind. He didn't play much at Alabama. We only saw him in week 12, according to PFF. He only had 5 snaps in that game. But in that 5 snaps, he had 2 tackles. He had 3 pass rushes. He had 5 plays. 2 of them were for running. 3 of them were for passing. And in those 5 plays, he had 2 tackles. Pretty interesting on that. PFF gave him a pass rush grade of 72.2 on those 5 plays. Obviously, super small sample size. Obviously, we don't want to take a lot from that. But it's something to keep in mind that when he got the opportunity to play, 6'4", 239, he had the opportunity to do so, and he made the most of it. 2 tackles on 5 plays. I'll take that any day of the week. I think we're going to see a lot more than 5 snaps out of a guy like Jayshawn Ross for Kansas State. Heading into college from high school, I found a scouting report online from MikeFarrellSports.com And he said, quote, two-way player who also lined up at wide receiver and competes in varsity basketball, was a Big 12 and SEC target. And that's true. Obviously, he committed to Alabama. Kansas State was looking at him in the recruiting process. Said he had good height, poor size with good upper body strength, very good quickness off the snap, very good acceleration and stride length, created a very good burst when the gap aligned, and beating offensive tackles to the spot consistently. Now, if that's the case and that continues on, I have not looked at the 5 plays that Ross was playing with Alabama in week 12, but if you made 2 tackles, you have to make the assumption that he did a really good job at beating the offensive lineman off the ball to make that play. That's a strong assumption in my mind. You're going into a time where you're looking to improve the edge, possibly maybe improve the Sam linebacking position. A guy like Ross with this athletic structure, 6'4", maybe could be that size. I mean, when you look at what's left on this roster, it's not a need, but it could be a really good push moving forward. So a huge addition for Kansas State, should be able to provide a big impact. This is my initial reaction from this. We're going to dig more into Ross and his play, and maybe look at some of maybe it says high school tape moving on further on, but we're just hours from him signing. We'll get more into that later on in the offseason as we prepare for spring ball. Hopefully he gets an opportunity to maybe find a way to start, right? I mean, but for the most part, with the exception of Mott, this linebacking core, this edge core of this defensive room, the pass rushing room, if you will, is all coming back. So this is probably going to be a depth piece right off the bat. I think we have a good idea if that's going to be the case. Yes, he's coming from Alabama. That's a huge get. I think you saw more of him playing at St. Pius High School rather than seeing him at Alabama. But that just shows that Kansas State has a good idea of what they're getting, and him coming back home maybe lights a fire, maybe sets a edge, if you will, and bringing back. So Jayshawn Rich being the 10th guy coming for Kansas State in the transfer portal, now up to 124 players on the roster. Getting down to 105 is not going to be an easy task, but again, that's a good problem to have. That means that the best 105 is going to be coming your way heading into week 0 against Dublin. Let's talk about what's left on the docket, because there's going to be plenty left. I thought 10 was going to be the absolute maximum of where this portal hits, but it looks like that's not going to be the case. And again, that's a good thing. Bring as many as you can in right now. Worry about the cuts later, because you have plenty of time to do so, and you can focus on that moment later. We'll see what's going on with some visits and who's left on the eyes of Kansas State, and maybe where the focus should shift. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, attending the new 12-team college football playoff games was an exciting experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games, and I can't wait to make new memories with the updated and extra teams involved. We're down to the final 4 teams. A lot of people think that's a really good spot with Ohio State, Penn State, Texas. It should be a really, really good college football playoffs. It's unfortunate that a Big 12 team didn't make it. I think Arizona State should have, but I digress. It was targeting, by the way. Game Time has this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets easier for events. It filters out the fluff. It shows incredible deals on great seats. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets, especially if you're looking for the college football playoffs. Maybe you can check it for the latest Kansas State basketball games and so much more. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast for the Kansas State Wildcats. Hey, for your second listen today, check out Locked On Big 12. The Locked On Big 12 squad will be coming at you Thursday, talking everything but sports in that case. So if you're looking for a little bit of fun, check that out on Thursday's episode. But in the meantime, you can always check out Drake Toll and his great takes covering the Big 12 conference. We're talking about a huge commit for Kansas State. And I mean huge because we got another edge rusher. Alabama transfer Jayshawn Ross comes in, someone that we were recruiting when he was coming out of high school. Hopefully that is something that moving forward is a great asset for the Wildcats in 2025 and beyond. He has 4 years of eligibility left. So that's a big need for the future of this club. We talked about how it's going to be a tough challenge for getting to 105. And I don't think they're done yet. I think there's still plenty of things left for this team to look at. And it looks like the focus is going to continue on wide receiver and offensive line. Unfortunately, we talked about it on Friday, how I thought the priority should be set on getting Malik Benson. Well, his priorities weren't set on Kansas State. Malik Benson went ahead and committed to Oregon. Call it what you will, but Oregon gets Malik Benson. We get Lincoln Cure. That's how I see it. Lincoln Cure decided to stick with Kansas State, our top recruit in the history of the program, instead of going to Oregon this offseason. And instead, Malik Benson decides we were in his top 5. He decides to commit to Oregon. Oregon's getting a really good recruiting class. It's not a surprise. Phil Knight, owner of Nike, comes out and says that he's willing to spend almost as much, like unlimited bankroll, for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks to do so, to make sure they win a national championship. They fell short this year yet again after losing to Ohio State just this past weekend. So they're trying to retool as much as possible. After winning the Big Ten their first year in the league, they're going to continue and add in the portal. And Malik Benson, although he's probably going to be the 4th or 5th wide receiver in that room, which I think he could have battled to be wide receiver 2 for Kansas State, decides to go to Oregon. Money talks. There's no doubt about that. Not saying that Kansas State isn't putting some out, but Oregon obviously is in a whole different category in my mind. But there's some other visits on the docket right now. Transfer offensive linemen are also has some visits as well. The offensive lineman conversation is still going to be in the need. USC offensive lineman Amos Talele is the only transfer coming into Kansas State on the offensive line. We're still waiting on a couple waivers to see if some of the players for Kansas State will be returning. We'll see how that happens. I hope that's the case because, again, it's all about adding depth, battling in spring. I think spring's going to be more interesting than ever before because of this 105 cut. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on spring. We'll have you covered right here. We're going to be talking about position battles, everything, you name it, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But we've talked already about in the past couple of days about Brandon Snee, who might be a potential add for offensive lineman. Another one on the line is Mason Bowers, Kennesaw State transfer. He also played at Coastal Carolina during his time, entered the portal. He did receive an offer from Kansas State on January 6th, and he looks like he's going to take a visit to Kansas State sometime this week. He went on, according to On3, he went on the record to say that he didn't know much about Kansas State, but he's definitely excited after receiving his offer. He said that Connor Riley is the one that offered the North Carolina native. And what he said about the conversation, he said the conversation was good. And quote, he said, Riley expressed he needed a tackle. And he said, I was a good fit because of how violent I play and my athleticism. So shout out to On3 for this report right here. And he said that he will visit Kansas State on January 8th. So he will visit him on Wednesday at some point. Looks forward to meeting the coaches and getting a feel of what Manhattan, Kansas is all about. So if you see anything on social media, be sure to give the love because we could definitely use another offensive lineman in the mix. He also said, according to On3, that he will commit to a school probably late this week. So it sounds like Kansas State is going to be his last visit. And sometimes it's not always about who's the best, it's who's last when it comes to these portal visits, because you have that recency bias in your head and you can take advantage of that. Not saying that Manhattan's not a great place to be and Kansas State's not a great school to be, because it's definitely the case. It definitely is. And in the eyes of the football program, there's not many who have that nice stat that we keep bringing up of having consistent 8 wins or more 8 or more wins in a season. So, and on the offensive line, I mean, we're talking probably the best position group on the team for multiple years now. Being an offensive lineman coming into, this offense and this program if you're trying to make that next step up to the NFL, I mean, there's not many better places to do that than Kansas State. So I'll be interested, and I'll definitely be paying attention, keeping my eyes glued to the computer and some of the newses and the message boards and all that good stuff to see what happens with this visit. And hopefully it ends up with a finale of him committing to Kansas State. Could be number 11 on the docket, could be number 12. Who knows? Because we're still waiting on some other names to possibly be committed. Worrying about Ortiz, the linebacker, the D2 linebacker that we have thought for a long time that he will basically commit. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe it'll be the Gabe Powers situation where we really didn't get that official news, but we found out he committed. We didn't get the official announcement of Gabe Powers. Maybe we'll get the same thing talking about another linebacker heading to Kansas State. But overall, the biggest focus now is what happens with the wide receivers. Are we going to shift directions? Are we going to still go after a third wide receiver? Offensive lineman obviously seems to be another key. Are we going to get one or two more in the portal? And then who else will commit? I think when it's all said and done, I think we're closer to 15 commits rather than the 10 we're at right now. So I'm thinking that we get to 13 or 14 or even 15 when it's all said. I think we round up in that range, and I think we finish closer to 15 than we are right now in 10. Well, to wrap up today's show, I want to talk about a few announcements that came across with some of the players, some that are just leaving and some that are just getting here, and some interesting news surrounding them. We're going to finish up the show with that news right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. The NFL playoffs are right around the corner. We got some really fun games happening this weekend. I love the 3-day slate of the Saturday, Sunday, Monday slate. And you can get in your parlays, your player props, anything you name it, while you are sitting back and enjoying NFL playoffs. I got chili planned. I got the crock pot ready to roll. I think I'm going to make some meatballs as well. We're going to have a good time, and I'm definitely going to utilize FanDuel. So go ahead and visit FanDuel.com. Join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, the official sports partner of the NFL. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rau, and we're discussing, well, we got a great transfer portal addition in Jayshawn Ross, edge rusher. I think like we've attacked every single position that we need to attack heading into the new year. I think we've really pushed every button that is needed and then some. It's really exciting to see what Coach Kleiman's doing with this roster. And, you know, after having a 7-1 start and then ending the year not on a great note, he finds a way to gain momentum after having a great national signing day, a great recruiting class. And then although it already seems like a distant memory, but once the transfer portal started, Kansas State was very quiet. There was not a lot of noise with Kansas State. And it's turned into a completely different story now with already 10 committing. And I think, as I mentioned before, that we're going to wind up closer to 15 when it's all said and done. The biggest question will be, and we'll be talking about it all season long as we head up to the opening kickoff in Dublin, is how do they get to 105 and how do they get the best players available on that roster? And we're going to be dissecting that as best as we possibly can on this show all year long. But I want to talk about some fun things here as we wrap up today's show. The Senior Bowl announced that Jacob Parrish will be playing in the Reese's Senior Bowl on February 1st in Mobile, Alabama. He was announced on Tuesday night on social media that he will be playing. This is the first time they're allowing underclassmen that have declared for the draft to play in this one. So really cool to see him play. The game will be at 1:30 Central Time, and it'll be played in Mobile at the University of Southern Alabama's Hancock Whitney Stadium. It'll be also on NFL Network. If you want to make the trip, the tickets are going to be on sale soon. You can check that out at seniorbowl.com. I was surprised that DJ Giddens also wasn't announced for this game because there were multiple players. I believe it was 7 players at the beginning of the season that were on the Senior Bowl watch list for Kansas State. And it looks like the only player that will be representing is Jacob Parrish. But regardless, really cool for that to happen because, I mean, this is the longest continual running all-star game that has is for college football. It's a lot of people think is the first step for you when you're making your NFL draft approach. According to the website on Senior Bowl, they said this past April, speaking of the NFL draft last year, the Senior Bowl produced 110 picks, representing 43% of the entire NFL draft. So it gives you a good idea of who is going to be in the league next year in the NFL. And Jacob Parrish obviously going to get a chance to show his skills in front of plenty of scouts in the Senior Bowl. Jim Nagy, you'll see him on social media. He's a great lover of the college football game and does a great job with the Senior Bowl. So congratulations to Jacob Parrish. Another spot in the news, and we're talking about another player that's entering the NFL draft, and that's Cephas. We saw Dante Cephas entering the NFL draft. He had multiple schools. He went to Kent State, Penn State, and ended his years with the Kansas State Wildcats. This past season wasn't as great as we expected it to be. Only 15 receptions for 184 yards. It was good enough for averaging over 12 yards per catch. Just didn't get enough production as we were hoping for in his time with Kansas State. Regardless of it, he is entering the NFL draft. The 6', 193 wide receiver out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania will hopefully be getting drafted. I hope that's the case. It'd be great to see us have multiple draft picks. And I think we're definitely going to have multiple when it comes to Parrish, Giddens, possibly Cephas here. I think we have a chance of getting about 4 players drafted in the 7 rounds when it's all said and done. So congratulations to Dante Cephas declaring for the NFL draft. I look forward to cheering you on in the NFL. And to wrap up today's show, let's spin the keys here and let's talk about not players who are leaving, but a player who's coming in. And that's our top recruit, Lincoln Cure, obviously coming to Kansas State, one of the best recruits that this program has ever seen. Not one of the, is the best, according to the eyes of 24/7 and On 3, highest ranking recruit ever. Instead of going for Oregon, like we talked about Malik Benson heading there, Lincoln Cure is committed, sticking with Kansas State, but he's also preparing for the Navy All-Star Bowl. And that's coming later on this week. That game will be on January 11th. We'll see that game. I believe that's televised as well, but he's going ahead and going to compete in that in San Antonio. And yes, it's on January 11th. It's set to kick off at noon, and it'll be nationally televised on NBC. So he'll be on the East squad taking on the talented West roster, and that'll be in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome. I've been to the Alamo Dome watching a UTSA game. It's a really fun atmosphere. It's a fun experiment, and the stadium is really fun to watch a football game in. So I hope he enjoys the time there. It looks like from the practice pictures and videos we've seen from this bowl game that he's going to be wearing number 15 in the game. So keep your eyes on that. Looks like there's going to be some red helmets as well for his team, for his side. So congratulations, Lincoln Cure. If you want to get a first taste of him playing against some other top prospects, top recruits before we get the spring ball and get to see him play in purple for Kansas State, you can check that out on January 11th at noon kickoff when he plays in the All-Navy Bowl. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode here of Locked On Kansas State. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll be back here again tomorrow as we continue to break down the college football portal talk. Hopefully we have some more news. Hopefully it moves up to 11, 12, and therefore continuing on with more commits. We got a lot to talk about with basketball. I've been holding back some thoughts on that, and we'll be continuing that here very soon. But until then, we'll see you back here with another episode of Locked On Kansas State.